going to finish out the sleep section and chapter of human neuropsychology today with this lecture. And so the last slide that we had covered was about sleep being a biological adaptation. And so there are multiple ways that you can look at sleep being energy conserving if you're not out gathering food or hunting for food or trying to protect yourself from a predator, then you are conserving energy. And so sleep can be used to help us conserve energy because we're not being physically active, but also it can help to conserve energy if you're injured. So for example, if you injure your leg or hurt your arm, while you're sleeping, you are not in an active state and you can't further the injury. What we find in animals that consume nutrient-rich diets, they're actually needing to spend less time out foraging for food because they need less of that food to basically have a healthy life. And because they're spending less time foraging for food, then they're spending more time sleeping. So those animals that are dependent upon diets that they're not getting a lot of nutrients and they have to consume a whole lot of food tend to spend more time foraging for food and less time sleeping. We do find that animals that are predators or that don't have a lot of predators tend to spend more time sleeping than prey. For example, a lion spends a lot more time during the day sleeping than a mouse sleeps, for example, and mice are nocturnal, so they're sleeping during the day and out at night. We're also finding that wherever the animal is traveling easiest, of course, that's the time that that they're going to be active. And if you consider animals that are nocturnal, they usually have very good vision at night, and they're sleeping during the day. For example, humans do not see very well at night. But again, it's unclear if the activity at night is caused by or causes the poor vision, or the lack of activity at night. So one really interesting thing to consider about sleep is that if it's evolutionary, if there's no real reason for sleep, then it's one of the biggest evolutionary mistakes, because sleep puts us in a vulnerable position and we are at risk for getting attacked by a predator during the time that we are inactive. So it must serve some purpose, some sort of evolutionary purpose for us to sleep and spend so much time doing that, for us to devote so much time of our day doing that activity. A few other possible hypotheses is that sleep is a restorative process. And so one idea is that we have energy that our cells need to live and to function, and that as we're awake, that function becomes reduced the longer that we're awake. And then when we fall asleep, then those processes are replenished. And then when we wake again, we're kind of almost like charged, right? So it's like where batteries run continuously low throughout the day, and then you charge them up while you sleep, and then you're able to continue functioning the following day. And so another idea is that it's all our circadian rhythms. And so we know that blood pressure and heart rate, breathing, temperature, all have circadian rhythm and circadian fluctuations. So another idea is that our fatigue and alertness are just simply products of our circadian rhythm and not necessarily wear and tear on the body. So there are definitely some hypotheses about why we sleep, because when we get down to brass tacks, we don't know exactly the main purpose why we sleep. We know we sleep when we're tired, and we know that it can be very damaging if we don't get enough sleep, but the absolute end-all be-all reason why we sleep is still pretty an unknown. So we know that sleep is really important for memory, and it's important for memory storage. So it helps, the process of sleeping helps us solidify and organize the events in our memories and individual memories. And so the process of being able to take a memory and concrete that memory and stabilizing it after we've learned is called consolidation. So one idea is that a memory might move from the initial coding site. So throughout the day, you're seeing things, you're learning things, you're meeting new people, you're learning new concepts, learning how to do new things. And initially, it's going to be encoded in one part of the brain. And then during this process of consolidation, it gets moved to another location that's more permanent. The consolidation process strengthens the memory so that it lasts. So the idea is during sleep, your brain is sort of sorting through those memories, kind of like you would through a file cabinet. And whatever is not necessary, not important, gets trashed. Whatever is important gets kind of bold, becomes bolder, more bold-faced, and is strengthened for us to remember or be more likely to remember in the future. The process of reconsolidation is restabilizing a memory trace after that memory has already been revisited. And the idea is that whatever you've learned previously will then again be re-strengthened because you are thinking about it during your sleep. And so this is kind of where the idea comes from in terms of consolidation and reconsolidation, that we do this during sleep. And if, for example, you pull an all-nighter after you need to take an exam the next day and you just study all night, you're actually depriving yourself of this consolidation and reconsolidation process. So those students, and there have been several studies on this, those students who go ahead and go to sleep and get a solid 8 hours before a test tend to do a whole lot better than those who stay up all night studying and cramming for the test. And also students who take a brief sort of cat nap right before a test tend to do better as well, because they're allowing their brain to do the process of consolidation of memory, and they're strengthening what they've learned versus just trying to cram and memorize everything, and they'll lose it very quickly. So different types of memory are consolidated at different points of sleep. And so we've learned that episodic or explicit memory, so explicit memory is any memory that you can actually talk about. It's, you can declare, it's declarative. Episodic memories are those that are about episodes in your life. So things that happen to you, the food that you ate, the people that you talked to, things that you can think about, talk about, and remember almost like a movie-like way in your brain. During non-REM sleep, we consolidate these episodic or explicit memories. When we're in REM sleep, we consolidate implicit memories. So these are those memories that are a little bit harder to talk about. They're the non-declarative memories like procedural memory and motor memory, that we learn a new skill or we learn how to do something. And so this process of shifting a memory from an initial encoding place to a more permanent place happens during sleep. We know that reconsolidation likely happens both during wake and during sleep. And we see this happening both in daydreaming and night dreaming. And so we know that the process of reconsolidation is important to us being able to continue to remember things and continue to keep those memories. And consolidation is a very important part and process of sleep itself. Now, it's really interesting. The evidence that we have for consolidation of memory during sleep comes from the fMRI studies, where we've had people, and there have been fMRI studies on this, there have been EEG studies on this, PET. There's been some really, really cool studies that look at direct electrode placement directly on the surface of the brain. And those studies have been done when a person, for example, has epilepsy and is getting prepared for surgery. And so what happens is that if you are preparing for surgery because you have epilepsy and you're going to have some aspect of your brain altered, or perhaps surgically removed, whatever it might be, or evaluated, there are some researchers who are able to get some studies in where they study memory or sleep during the process of your brain being exposed. And so there was a relatively recent study done, similar to the study that we see here on the screen, where they had people learn a task and then they looked at the activity, the electrode activity on the from the electrodes during the task, and then they looked at the activity from the electrodes while the person was sleeping. And just like you see here, there was a certain pattern of activity that you see. Okay, this is while, in this particular example, this is a PET scan, and this was a reaction time task. And so you can actually see the particular pattern of activity that happens during the testing. Then when the person's asleep, while they're in REM, we see a very similar pattern of activity. And that tells us that the brain is going back over what it did earlier that day. And so specifically, it's going over this reaction time task. And if you remember from this slide here, it's that implicit memory that is consolidated during REM sleep. Now, one interesting thing that we have learned over the course of studying the brain is that the brainstem is very important for being able to regulate the sleep-wake cycle. There's a particular specific series of nuclei and nerve fibers, which are referred to as a large reticulum, that runs through the center of the brainstem. And we know that if that area is damaged, it can cause a coma. It can cause loss of consciousness, and in some cases, permanent loss of consciousness, where the person is not demonstrating any kind of brain activity where they're able to kind of wake from again. We tend to call this reticular activating system the reticular formation, specifically where it is located on the brainstem. If you stimulate the reticular formation during a person, so if you're able to stimulate that particular area with electrodes, we find that the person demonstrates a waking EEG. And if you damage it, you see a slow wave EEG, similar to how you would see, for example, in deeper sleep. So right here is that reticular formation. So it's sort of in the middle of the brainstem. It's not one of those things that you would be able to dissect a brain and then see a structure. It is just a series of nuclei that go up and down the middle of the brainstem. It's not like an actual structure in of itself. And so when we consider this, the reticular activating system and the waking system really operates on two major brainstem systems. And so this is specifically how we consider waking and waking from sleep and staying awake. So we have the basal forebrain and we have the median Raphe nucleus. And so both of these systems are important for wake, and both of them operate with two primarily different neurotransmitters. So the basal forebrain works with acetylcholine, and the basal forebrain itself contains cholinergic cells that secrete acetylcholine onto neocortical neurons, and that stimulates a waking EEG. And so if you see a waking EEG rhythm, that looks a lot like beta waves. They're kind of tighter sawtooth patterns. Now the other waking system is the median Raphe nucleus, and that's located in the midbrain. And that operates primarily with serotonin. And so it contains these serotonergic neurons, and that those neurons will project diffusely to the neocortex. And these also stimulate beta rhythms. And so we're seeing two major systems, and we're seeing that they operate on two different systems, one moving to the different areas of the cortices so that it can send that information to the entire area of the brain to not only help wake from sleep, but also to keep the brain awake. And so here are two different brainstem nuclei that are responsible for REM. So we have two different systems working for